You can't spell funeral without the word fun. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thumb Together TV. My name is Andrew Fantasia, and today we're going to be talking about Succession Season 4, Episode 9, Church and State Together. As usual, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up, give some love to that subscribe button as well. And as always, if you are a fantasy fan or you know somebody who is, it would help me out and it would help them out if you were to purchase We Were Wizards, my fantasy novel series that I have independently published, and you can get them on Amazon right now. The purple one is the first one, followed by the silver one. You can get them in hardcover, ebook, or paperback. We Were Wizards is full of magic and wizards and fun and adventure and all the old school stuff. If you love Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, baby, you are about to be in flavor country. As I mentioned last week, my suspicion was correct. This season is in fact happening on a day-by-day basis where every episode is one day in the lives of the kids since at least Logan's death. So we come at last to the big day, the funeral, the mass, the procession, the burial, and the reception. This episode covers it all from start to finish. Church and State is a very apt name for it. It is happening in a church with what looks like a Catholic priest, a Catholic ceremony, but all the while there is politics that are happening. There's business that's happening. There are deals being made inside this church and in this cemetery. It's really just taking these two disparate factors and combining them into an almost obscene blob. But that's the Roys for you. They don't care about the separation of church and state. They just care about the bottom line, namely their own individual bottom lines. That's a lot of lines and a lot of bottoms. And I feel like before all is said and done, next week, we will see each and every one of these characters we've been following for 4 years, more than 4 years now, reach the depths of those very bottoms. But for this extra long episode, they really just focused on the funeral of Logan Roy. And I really love how it was all just laid out and filmed, starting with, if you've ever been to a real funeral, and I hope you haven't been to very many, but just beginning with the whole preamble of everybody getting ready and trickling their way into the church and people, having hushed, buzzing conversations throughout the church as people keep filing in and finding their seats, and all of the drama that could possibly be happening during that stage of the funeral, because that stage of a funeral, there's some juice there. If you're a writer, there's some juice to mine in that space. And typically in fiction, you don't see that space. In fiction, when a funeral happens, you usually just cut to boom, the casket going into the ground, or if you're lucky, a eulogy or two. But the real truth of the matter is that space before the mass even begins, before the coffin even reaches the church, there are people interspersed throughout those pews who are doing and saying very interesting things. And I love the writers of Succession for giving that space to us. They have always done well at portraying this story not as a bombastic giant tale. It really does feel like a real true-to-life thing that is happening. And we, the viewers, are just very, very lucky flies on the wall who get to watch it all play out. And the documentary-style camera really lends credence to that fact. So getting to see every bit of this funeral, including that preamble space, top-notch. And it was, in fact, during this whole pre-mass scene that we get my favorite quote of the week, and it comes from Miss Siobhan Roy. She spots her mother, Caroline, entering the church, so Siobhan says, "Here she comes. I thought I could hear the sound of Dalmatians howling." And this is only totally strengthened by the fact that Caroline looks and behaves a hell of a lot like Cruella de Vil. So, bravo. I read that the production team filmed this entire funeral as one long, continuous experience. Essentially, they set up 4 cameras in this church. They had a 4-camera setup where they were getting all kinds of pans and zooms and close-ups and everything, but they literally just set the cameras up. They said, okay, start the funeral mass, and we are just going to roll through the whole thing and film it all as if it was really happening. So they really pushed the limits of their documentary style here. It must have been so surreal being an actor or even an extra in that church and just seeing the lines between reality and fiction being blurred. Kieran Culkin said in an interview that that's really what it felt like. He no longer felt like he was there performing a role. It was treated as if it was the death of a real human being, and people went up and spoke and behaved appropriately. And it is these four speeches that serve as the keystones of church and state. But it's Ewan who makes the first and, in my opinion, the most memorable speech. First of all, he's been a man of few words, and we don't see him too often, so this is the most we've ever gotten of James Cromwell throughout all of Succession. But to top it all off, he gets up on that altar and he gives us a very sincere, brotherly perspective on the creature that was Logan Roy. And he does it in a way that sugarcoats nothing at all, while at the same time laying bare the truth and the facts and saying, my brother was a monster, he was a hard ass, he was not a good person. However, here's some examples of my life and his that may make you see him in just a slightly more three-dimensional light. Worked on me as somebody who has feverishly disliked Logan Roy from the beginning. I still dislike him, but it's nice to pick up these little breadcrumbs and learn things like the fact that he caught polio and he believes he gave it to his sister and that's why she died in the crib, and little things like that. Dumb old me, I didn't even know polio was contagious. I didn't. I mean, I guess since it hasn't really been around anymore, it's not something that's been on my mind, but yeah, apparently you could theoretically give it to somebody. Yikes. Ewan has always been a character that I feel like the show is trying to tell us that he is probably the most sincere and, for lack of a better word, good person we will meet, especially within the Roy clan itself. So when he spoke, I made sure to listen, and I made sure to take that as more of any kind of canon Succession gospel than whatever anybody else said. And when the others went up to speak, it went pretty much the way you would expect it to. These three eulogies given by the three siblings perfectly sum up the way that they deal with their grief and where their characters are at right now, where their headspace is at. Roman goes up there and crumbles. He falls to pieces. It's plain and simple. That's where Roman is. Roman is a mess. And it's funny how a few episodes back he talked about being the one who wanted to give the eulogy, but we kind of knew ahead of time, didn't we? We knew this is not something that Roman is going to be good at. Roman giving a speech like this is not something we can see Roman doing. That's just not in his character. At best, it would have been a profanity-laden, highly inappropriate speech that would have been entertaining as hell for us, but scandalous and shocking for everybody sitting in that church. That was the best case scenario. We didn't even get that. We got a man who just falls apart. And he has that beautiful line where he looks at the coffin and says, is he in there? Can we get him out? He's just not ready to deal with the loss of his father. He's not ready to have such a big problem in front of him with no way of talking or buying his way out of it. And he compensates by having some kind of breakdown, and we actually end this episode with him inserting himself into a throng of people protesting the unjust victory, quote-unquote, of Mencken that Roman made happen. And he just kind of dives into the fray and almost gets trampled and really just loses himself into the mix of civilians. You know, we don't see civilians too often on this show, so when we do, and when a Roy interacts with them, it's always fascinating to see happen. But that's Roman's side of things. Kendall's side of things, again, is very appropriate to his character and to where he's been all season. Kendall is morphing into Logan 2.0, and that speech he gives is a great indication of that. It's a speech of something that I think Logan himself would have said regarding himself, which is, yes, he was hard, yes, he was cruel, yes, he was mean, he was a mean old bastard, but he made things happen. Logan has a very famous line when he's talking to, I believe, Rhea Jarrell in season 2 or 3, where he tells her, if I say something will happen, it'll happen. I make things happen. And that's how Kendall sees his father, and that's how Kendall wants to see himself, as a person who builds things, who makes things out of nothing. It was a very Western, pro-capitalism, pro-corporate America speech, because that was Logan, and that is Kendall. So it's not only a eulogy, but it's almost like a mission statement that he intends to follow. It's his own supervillain origin story in eulogy form. God, I love this episode. The final speech is given by Siobhan, and it is the hardest to read because she has been the hardest to read. She has been bouncing back and forth, doing things behind everybody's back. Everybody has, but we have seen her rise and fall the most this season, experienced a lot of highs and lows with Tom, with her siblings, having this pregnancy be something that is neither happy nor sad yet because she can't figure out if it is one or the other. She can't figure out whether she should be celebrating or whether it depresses her that the father of this baby is probably not going to be in her life. It's just kind of a thing that she has now that is superfluous to everything else going on. So in a much more subtle way than Kendall, it promises the idea that she is going to be an absentee parent, just like Logan was. And we see the most personal speech given by her because she actually addresses Logan and tells him he did all right. In a way, I feel like that's her justifying the fact that she wants to be more like him too, saying, you know, if Dad did all right with the kind of person he was, maybe if I'm like that as a parent, which I'm about to be, maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't have to worry about being a bad guy. Maybe I'll be all right. Again, she's giving us her own supervillain origin story justification in eulogy form to make herself feel better. And again, the episode gives us a great little quiet moment that happens in real life every single time when there's a death that we never see in fiction, which is that moment of just the kids, you know, their hands are in their pockets and they're just wandering into the mausoleum and they're just looking around and asking, oh, how long has Dad had this place? What did he pay for it? Oh, that's a good deal. Look, there's crypts. What do you think? Should we all get buried in these crypts? And contemplating their father's final resting place. Roman is still too freaked out to even set foot in it, so he just kind of hovers in the doorway. The season has been so great at showing us where these three kids are at based on their actions, or in this case, lack of action. This is something that happens all the time in death. And I love that the show took that moment to give it to us, to give us them just looking at the crypt and saying, well, this is it. This is where it all ends. And Siobhan has another really cool line where the coffin is being inserted into the crypt and she kind of whispers to her brothers, can't wait to see how he gets out of this one. And once the burial ends and everybody starts making their way to the reception, Kendall is already making his deals with Hugo, and Siobhan is furthering her deals with Mattson and Mencken, who, if you think about it, really shows how low she has sunk, because we started off this series with Siobhan in season 1 being a highly left-leaning person, so much so that she was a political advisor for a far left candidate. And now she is willing and ready to get in bed with not just a Republican, but a openly known fascist. Thus, all of the pieces are in place and the stage is set for our series finale. It's already almost here. It's less than a week away now. Honestly, I tried to come up with some kind of profound prediction for this video because it is the penultimate one, but I feel like I'm just going to stick to my guns and say what I said earlier this season, where I think the coolest way to end this show, the way I would do it, is to replace the old home movies of the credits and end things once and for all with new home movies of Kendall's children and Siobhan's children being neglected by a distant parental figure, and showing that the greed of all of these people is going to create the same cycle of sorrow and create a whole new batch of very troubled individuals who will go on to repeat the process again. That's where I feel Succession is going to close its doors as a cautionary tale of the dangers of too much money. Anyway, that's what I think next week is going to be like. But now it's your turn to drop in the comments what you think next week is going to be like. Where is this finale going to take us? It's going to be an extra long episode again, so I'm excited for that. And I'm excited, but, a little sad to say goodbye to one of the coolest shows on planet Earth right now. Anyway, that has been Succession. That has been Thumbed Together. I've been Andrew Fantasia. You have been magnificent. I will see you all here next time for the finale. Until then, adios.